This is Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing. I'm Rachel Gordon. Here, we aim to make the process of writing and publishing a bit more transparent and a bit less overwhelming. Through conversations with editors and academics at all stages, from full professors to graduate students, independent scholars, and postdocs, we share stories, lessons, and helpful habits from our writing lives. We're really excited to get to speak with Dr. Ayelet Fishbach, who is the Eric J. Gleacher Distinguished Service Professor of Behavioral Science and Marketing at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She is also a past president of the Society for the Science of Motivation and the International Social Cognition Network. Dr. Fishbach is also the author of Get It Done, Surprising Lessons from the Science of Motivation. And this book is not just for academics, but I thought it has some very good ideas for academics. And you, Ayelet, of course, have been coming from decades inside the academic mindset, having spent much of your career as a professor at the University of Chicago. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
You open the book with the idea of pulling, the idea that we all have to pull ourselves through difficult situations. And I think this is one of the reasons I love the book, because it started with this reminder that that none of us have a completely easy path, and that we're probably all familiar with that experience of having to pull our way through difficult situations. But can you tell us why you wanted to start the book with that metaphor?
Partially, Rachel, for the reason that you mentioned, just let's all face it, it's hard. Okay, it's not something simple to do to motivate yourself. And the other reason is that it's a bit paradoxical. Okay, like who's exactly motivating whom? Right? That you are kind of now the agent and the subject at the same time. And I am very interested in this problem. I think that it's kind of fascinating how we try to motivate ourselves, and so let's think about what it means and what exactly we are trying to do here before we actually jump in and do the work.
Much of the book is about setting and meeting goals, and the first section is about finding and setting the right kind of goal, which a lot of us might not even realize that there are right and wrong kinds of goals. Why is this such a challenge of finding the right kind of goal?
Well, people really have strong views on whether they are good or bad at self-regulation. Okay, like people say, I just am not a very motivated person, or I am a very greedy, self-control person. And then when you ask which goal they have in mind and what about the other goals, you often find that there is a very low correlation. That is, you might be very dedicated to your academic job, maybe you're an amazing parent, but you can't get yourself to exercise. Okay? I think that kind of was the case that the goal matters. You were able to find the right goal in terms of your career, or in terms of the specific research project that you decide to work on. You were unable to identify the right goal in terms of your health. I just having this introspection, just understanding that it's not about whether you are good or bad, it's often that you are both at the same time, suggested we need to be wiser about selecting goals. And this is even before I get to all the goals that we need to let go. We might not be able to do the things that are important for us because we did not let go for things that we just accumulated in the past few years and never quite removed from our plate.
One of the things I was surprised at in your discussion of goals is that you encouraged abstract goals in some situations. I feel like we've heard so much about you need to set very specific goals. And I actually thought you were very convincing about why a more abstract or lofty idea can be helpful. Can you explain that to listeners?
You touched the discrepancy in the literature where we hear about habits, okay, and implementation intentions. Now, important is to know how much and when exactly, and do it the same. And research on conceptual level, and the importance of the why and the abstract thinking. We do need to know how, okay? We need to have a plan, but it's not where we start. And when we start with that how, we might lose sight of the why. And if we don't have the why, we really find it hard to stay motivated. And so the suggestion and what the research tells us is that you need to ask the why questions, but you need to ask them only to the extent that they are still connected to how you are going to do this. So you tell me that you need to work on this project, and I ask why, and you say, well, this is important for me to understand a larger problem. Okay, or maybe this is important for me for my promotion, or maybe this will be useful for a book that I'm writing. And I can ask why. Okay, so why did you want to write this book or this paper? And you can explain why is that, and I can ask you again why. At one point you become so abstract that it's no longer connected to an action, and then you went too far.
Mm.
And so if you tell me I want to work on this because that will make me happy, well, for me at that point you went too far, because if I ask you how are you happy, you probably are not going to say by writing this paper.
Mhm.
So go abstract, okay, understand that the why, that helps with the goal selection, but don't go so abstract that you lose sight of the how.
So part of that, the reason that you're encouraging people to think about that abstract why is I might feel inspired by this. I guess to me, I come back to the word lofty, but another word might be inspiring kind of abstract goal that makes me feel sort of like, yeah, I want to be in that inspiring vision of what I could do or what I could be. So I guess that's what you're pushing people towards, like, sort of existing within that space?
So you will be inspired or not,
Uh-huh.
right? You
Right.
will realize that this is valuable, or no, this is
Mhm.
actually not valuable for me. I actually should have dropped it last year.
Mhm.
I mean, this fits with everything else that I'm trying to do in my career or in my life, or no, this is no something that does not work with this. Okay, so no, I know that we want to like focus on like the academic goals, but let's say you've been a runner for many years,
Mhm.
and running for you is just like part of your identity. Well, as it turned out, most runners at one point will have to switch.
Mhm.
And so when you ask, why am I running? And the answer is because I've always been a runner and I
Mhm.
could not find any other way to feel like I'm healthy. Well, maybe now you realize that there are other ways, and this might not fit your stage in life anymore. And, everybody should run if they love it and it's good for their body.
Right. Another aspect of that goal discussion was thinking beyond things that are chores. So I think a lot of us academics sometimes have goals on a list that might be about revising an article or submitting it or editing it. And those things that we're listing as goals might actually feel like chores. What are you suggesting people do to find the goal behind them?
So I love, Rachel, that you asked it after the previous question, because this is where the why is so useful. Okay? Is your job to answer emails? Is this what you were hired to do? Okay. Is your job to do the revise and resubmit? Well, probably more for the latter than the former.
Mhm.
And so understanding the why suggests that maybe I should do less on my email and more on making sure that I bring papers all the way through to publication. Now you can also take the activity itself, which is when you work on your email, what are you doing? Okay, are you playing ping pong with the world? Okay,
Hmm.
or are you disseminating knowledge? Okay, is answering emails part of your teaching, part of your job as an academic to bring knowledge to the world? And if you understand it on a higher level, then you might be doing it in a different way. And then, of course, for revising papers, that understanding that this is part of generating knowledge allows me to do it in a more meaningful way, to engage with this less as a a rebuttal and more as like how do I make the best case for an argument? How do I advance knowledge? It's very easy to get stuck on the chores level. Eh, I- who wants to be spending their career doing chores? Okay, no one. So, let's bring the meaning to this, and let's organize our goals such that we can do what we spent so many years training to do.
Hmm. One of the ways you suggest getting things done are is through setting targets, and you suggest using numbers or amounts. What kinds of concrete ways do you suggest that academics think about setting targets for themselves?
Putting a number is a useful strategy. Now, not always, it's one of the strategies on the menu, but many times. And so any number works, okay? Like when do you plan to finish writing the methods and results? Okay, how much time are you going to devote today to analyzing data? Okay, or answering emails. Targets are often useful mainly because we see anything below the meeting the target as a loss that we try to avoid. Okay, so if I set to finish the introduction, not finishing the introduction will feel like a loss, whereas like going beyond the introduction to also starting the general discussion, well, that's not very important. I need to meet my target. And so setting targets is useful for academics because our job tend to be less structured than other jobs. Okay, because frankly, most of us don't have a boss. Okay, and no one tells us how to organize our schedule. Targets end up being a very useful tool. Like this, what needs to be finished today, or by the end of the week. Okay, this is how much I plan to achieve.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking of something else you discuss in the book, which is both avoidance, which you mentioned, the desire to avoid kind of failing, and the kind of pull or aspiring towards completing or reaching a goal. And I guess I feel the avoidance part of it stronger as an academic. I guess I've had enough experiences where I didn't get the thing done in the time I hoped. I wasn't as prepared for the presentation, and I felt the pain of it. And I think that that desire to avoid that pain is personally like that. It feels like it's a very big motivator for me as an academic. What do you think is really working for academics?
The problem with avoidance goals, there are a few problems with avoidance goals, but the main problem with avoidance goals is that they are low on intrinsic motivation. It's not fun. Okay, there is less enthusiasm. Okay, you have to finish this report because if you did not finish it, that something happened. Okay, because you would lose something, which is you know, it's good. I mean, it's motivating in the sense that it feels more urgent. Okay, if I now have to prepare a class by the time that the class is ready, that means that my class will be ready. But going through our career, thinking about goals in terms of avoidance tends to kind of reduce the pleasure in doing it. And for many of our goals, we have the choice. That is, you can decide to think about teaching in terms of doing it well or in terms of not failing, not messing up. It's a almost a choice. Okay, it's a mindset. It's how we approach this. Okay, we can work on research, hoping to make a contribution, hoping to find something, hoping to feel interested, or no, they're trying to avoid failure, trying to avoid becoming irrelevant, trying to avoid the perish of the not publish. Right? It's a mindset. Approach goals tend to be more enjoyable. And so while they may seem less urgent, I would still say if you can adopt the approach mindset, probably in the long run, that's better.
Right. And I guess that brings up the issue of being intrinsically motivated, which is something else you discuss in the book. I feel that strongly in writing, which is why I always feel strange about putting rewards on writing, is because doing it often does feel fun and creating something feels rewarding in itself. If we have projects that aren't feeling as intrinsically we're not feeling as intrinsically motivated for, how do you suggest trying to find that?
Well, I'm like you. I like to write. Okay. On days that I don't write, I feel like, that wasn't a very productive day. Okay. On days that I write, I feel like I'm doing what I was meant to be doing. I'm in the flow. Okay. Like things are happening. And so, thanks for mentioning that. And then other things that are less intrinsically motivating, well, often the trick is to find the intrinsic motivation there. Okay, now it's not we can always find the intrinsic motivation, and in the short term, it's not a real problem. Okay, like we go and do some medical checkups that are unpleasant, and it's okay because it's only an hour and it's only once in a while. Okay. But if our job starts to feel like this, if like 8 hours a day, don't feel intrinsically motivated, then our data suggests that you're basically not going to be very good at it. Okay. You're not going to have the stamina and ability to keep producing. So something has to change. And it could be something about how you define the goal. Maybe you don't like writing this paper, but you would like to write another paper. Okay? Maybe you don't like teaching this class, but you would like to teach another class. Maybe you can change the angle of the materials to make yourself more engaged. Or it could be something about the environment. Okay, maybe you structured your life such that you write. I will use my personal example after 9 p.m. And after 9 p.m., I'm not a good writer. Okay, and I struggle, and it feels like I'm doing it because I know, like I told my co-author that I will get back to them, but it's not fun. Right? For me, it's fun to write at 9 a.m., not at 9 p.m. And for you, it might be fun to write in your office, but not at home, or at home, but not in the office. So like find the intrinsically motivating way of doing it, just the way you do any other goal. Okay, find the intrinsically motivating way of exercising, okay, of healthy eating, and doing your work because it's what you do most of the day.
Right. I guess you also offer the tip of incentivizing, I guess, when that makes sense. So, I mean, you had the example of grading, which I really identified with because it's one of my least favorite activities as a professor. But you mentioned doing it in a fun cafe where you're sort of got an ambiance that makes you feel like you're having fun, even though the activity itself doesn't always feel that way, and you have a drink you like. And so are incentives then for you something that you see more necessary for the activities that we're less intrinsically motivated for?
This is one way, right? So incentives are most frequently used to motivate others. Okay? It's why we do grading in the first place, right? We motivate our students to pay attention and study the materials. And so we provide them the incentive in terms of a grade. Okay. Self-incentives are a bit funny because again, like who's incentivizing whom? If I like to go to cafes, why wouldn't I do it regardless of grading? However, to the extent that we can structure it in this way, and I use coffee and tea as incentives all the time, then we can keep ourselves going. Okay, we can bring this no, fun incentive, this fun mini goal to the general goal. That is, I'm grading because I need to grade, right? That's the goal, okay? To grade, to meet the expectations that my students and no, my institution have for me. But this cup of tea becomes the mini goal, okay? If I finish these 20 assignments, well, I get to have a nice warm beverage.
Right. Yeah, and it sometimes works. It reminds me too of this other topic that came up, which I think many academics are familiar with. Either we ourselves have experienced or we know friends who have this sunken cost idea or sunk cost fallacy, the sense that you've come too far in a project to stop now, or that because you've made an investment, you need to keep going regardless of whether you're getting any closer to your goal or whether it's even the best choice for you. And you point out that economic theory suggests that resources invested in the past that cannot be recovered should not influence your motivation to persist in the present. And yet, for so many of us academics, I think it does. And I think I see this all around me is that we have the feeling we've already done this much work or this much research, so we should just continue with it. I mean, I'm thinking especially for humanities scholars, how do you advise them or help them think about when to give up on a project?
Sunk cost fallacy is an interesting one. Okay, it's an interesting one because while it's clearly a fallacy, okay, that is at any given point in time, you should invest your resources where it most pay off. Okay, you have only a certain number of hours in the day, and probably fewer hours when you're actually sharp. And so you should invest it where you expect the payoff to be maximal. But the sunk cost fallacy allows us to commit. And basically allows us to work on something, even though at this point in time it doesn't feel like the most rewarding task, only because I've already invested. I'm already committed. And so the challenge here is to really identify for you, are you now on the side of the fallacy? Are you basically making a mistake? Okay, what the economist would call a mistake because there are better options? Or are you somehow managing through the difficult time, okay, through the stretch where there is not a lot of progress, there is not a lot of movement? So now let's take, for example, advising, okay? You should not give up on a student just because they were struggling for a period of time and it didn't look like this advising relationship is going anywhere. Okay, we should allow some time where we feel no progress, and maybe I should invest my limited time in another student, but I will still help this one because we've been working together for a while. However, at one point, I realized that this advising relationship is going nowhere. Okay, that we walk with each other only because we have been walking with each other, and it's better for both of us if we basically go in different directions. And we need to recognize that. And so here's again where I basically call for greater awareness. Okay, design your motivation. Okay, be wise about it. Is this a goal that needs to stay on your plate, even though there is not a lot of progress recently? Okay, or should it be dropped?
That, brings up the topic of working with others, which is something else you address in the book, co-authoring in particular. And this can be, when we collaborated, it can be very energizing and actually help pull you or along, or the other person can help pull you along. But sometimes it can feel full of friction. How do you get it more towards the latter? How have you found that you're able to make collaborations be helpful for getting things done?
Personally, I almost always collaborate. Okay. I also, when I look at the data, this is where science is going even more and more. Okay, papers have more co-authors now than before, and this is just the way science develops. That we have more people that are bringing their unique expertise, and so I would not think about whether to collaborate or not, but how to collaborate, and from my perspective, how to keep the team motivated. And now, one way to think about it is, should I tell people and myself, should I emphasize what we have done versus what is still missing? And kind of how to be strategic about it. Okay. As it turned out, for less committed team members, it's best to emphasize what we have done. Okay. If I have a co-author that is really struggling with doing their part of the writing, I want to remind them that they already did the research and they already did the analysis, and there is a lot that was already invested. So come on. If I have a co-author that is highly motivated, I say, well, let's finish it by the end of spring. Okay, let's aim to submit it by the end of the month, kind of highlighting this is where we are going. You still need to write these parts, but we are getting closer. Kind of be strategic in what you highlight. Then, of course, there is like the division of labor, identify each person's role and contribution, and just be a good manager, a good leader of the team.
Yeah, that is so true. I know when I'm working with other academics, sometimes I'm not even so conscious of it, but I think I often have this fear like, am I doing okay to them? Are they happy with being my partner? Do they wish they weren't being my partner? How am I measuring up to what they expected? So I can imagine hearing that, that back from them, that we've done so much or that I've contributed would be very helpful.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you too, you have this great chapter called You're Wrong about getting feedback. What were you hoping to communicate there?
Oh, that's a whole podcast by itself. Okay, and for us as academics, negative feedback is so much part of our daily lives, right? And unlike in other industries, if you work for a company and a product fails, it's not on you. Okay, it's like in general we were not doing very well. In academia, there is no buffer. Like you get it personally. It's in your mailbox. We just did not like your paper. We are not convinced by your argument. So negative feedback is very prevalent in our academic work. I believe that it's one of the barriers to enjoying our job as academics. That there's just a lot of negativity, and some of us don't handle it right. And then a few things to keep in mind here. Negative feedback is hard to learn from, okay, but it often has useful information. That is that you need to have a certain confidence in yourself and in your ideas in order to even learn from the negative feedback. Many times you get negative feedback and you just put it aside and just ignore it because you don't feel you can emotionally survive it. It's also cognitively hard to know what to do with negative feedback when a colleague or a reviewer or an editor tells you that you did something wrong. They don't usually tell you how to do it right. Okay, so cognitively, it's just hard to figure out how to solve that. And yet, negative feedback tends to be more idiosyncratic, more revealing. It has good information. The one trick that was recently shared with me, so it's not in the book, is to ask AI to summarize the negative feedback for you in a gentle way.
That's an interesting use of AI. Yeah. Huh.
Right? So,
Yeah.
like, what I understand is the method is like you will eventually read the negative reviews. Okay, maybe you will read them in an hour. Okay, but right now, can you just give me in one paragraph, in one gentle paragraph, why they did not like my
Mhm.
research?
Mhm.
And kind of allow yourself in a softer way to dive in and try to engage in the negative feedback in a productive way. And by the way, if you feel that at this point in your career or in your day, reading the negative feedback is going to undermine your motivation beyond recovery, don't.
Mhm.
Right? Put it aside and hopefully you can do this tomorrow or next week. I can know that it has really good information, but it can also undermine your motivation in ways that are not helpful.
Yeah, I guess something I've learned is so it always the harsh reviews always sting me a lot when I first get them. And often it's just, a journal article comes back with those two reviews, at least in my field, it tends to. And often one of them feels kind of too harsh or severe to me. And it really hurts at the time. I put it aside. And sometimes that is a week, sometimes it's a few weeks, and it just stings a lot less later. Another thing that has worked for me is since my husband's an academic, I'll ask him to read it. And since he often knows my work well too, does he think, and just because he's another person, he can often be a little more objective, does he see useful things? Like letting him know, I really want to find what's useful, but I'm too emotional to be able to see that myself. And that is helpful when it's, someone who you feel is on your side, but also wants to maybe help you get to the good stuff. What things do you personally do when you get the sort of harsher feedback?
So I like this. I should try to get people around me to read my negative reviews. What works? Well, no, one thing is to remind yourself that this is the review process, that papers get negative reviews, that we are in the they often engage in this method of let me find all the holes in your research. Okay, so you can address them and make your research better. So it's a bit of this is the paradigm. It's a paradigm of learning from negative feedback, and it, you kind of need to accept it, even though as a a human you prefer to learn from positive feedback. You
Right.
actually have to learn from negative feedback. So I do that, and frankly, I just get so much negative feedback that at one point I'm like, well, okay, here I am, still smiling. It's fun to think about the ideas. It's fun to do the job. Many times people don't see things the way I do, and that what makes me unique and
Mhm.
see what I want to advocate for. That's what I do. That's what I tell myself.
That sounds good. And I wanted to ask you if you could just step back. What made you write a book about getting things done? I was just curious if you had at some point in your career felt like, gosh, I'm looking around and so many of my colleagues or just other smart people I know have trouble getting their stuff done. And I don't know if you, because of your training and your expertise, just felt like you could see certain things that if only people realized, what were you really hoping to share or explain or make better for folks?
So thank you for this question. It's really the book came out of me wanting to figure out what is that I know about motivation that can be useful, believing that knowledge predicts performance. That if people know about motivation, if they understand the menu, okay, if they understand how to do it, then they will do it. Now, as a motivation scientist, we had all kind of like general understandings of motivation in the field. We used to think that it's willpower, okay, like going all the way back to like the marshmallow test and Michelle and Walter Michel, and No, I had the strength model as a field. Okay, so there was a lot of work on like depletion and just like having the muscle for motivation. And I still think that there is something to having strong willpower or just being strong, okay, just practicing motivation. But there is a lot of research now on knowledge, okay, on just like know how to do it, make it easy, okay, don't work harder, just make it easier, okay. And so I felt like I sit on all this knowledge, which I actually think it would be useful. And no, I wrote the book at the time when the research in motivation science started to get more and more evidence that knowledge matters. And so here what I know, hopefully other people can find it useful.
Yeah. And since you mentioned before, I think you said you were someone who likes writing earlier in the day, which I noticed many of my academic friends were like that too. So I'm just curious, knowing what you do, what is your kind of ideal day like? And for instance, if writing earlier in the day is something you know works better for you, do you have much lower or very different work expectations of yourself later in the day?
So it's interesting because I really like to write, and so I don't actually need to motivate myself to write compared with my other work tasks. Okay, I am not good with meetings and admin, probably like many other academics, and so these are the things that I will try to postpone. Okay, like reading the materials for a meeting. I will procrastinate like nobody. Writing is easier because, if I can work on a paper or read or, prepare for a meeting, I will be writing the paper.
Mm,
I do still need to organize my day and I, try to like arrange it so that there is more time for writing, that the time is, it's hard to write in half an hour. Okay. So that there is a period of at least a couple of hours, and then just find the passion for it. But I want to say that, like many of the things that we like doing, it's not something that we were born liking.
mm,
So I remember myself struggling with writing. Okay, you kind of need to get to the point where it feels natural, where it is intrinsically motivated after practicing quite a bit. And so, again, using other goals as an example, if you start exercising, it's not going to feel comfortable. You need to do it a little bit before you figure out whether this is the routine that you love. Okay. You change your diet, it feels like something is wrong here, like I don't get enough sugar or I don't get enough meat, whatever. Okay. Only after a couple of weeks, it starts to feel good. Writing might take more than a couple of weeks. You really need to be willing to engage and suffer before it's fun.
mm. There's two questions that we ask all guests, and one is something about what is something you wish you could tell your younger self about writing or publishing that you didn't know earlier that you've discovered.
I think I will have to just say that I was unaware how much we change and develop, and how much I will change and develop. And you kind of you get your PhD and you think that that's it, you are done learning. And I would tell that person, oh, you're just at the beginning of learning. Your career is about learning, and you're going to learn about the field, but you're also going to learn a lot about yourself and who you are and what you like doing, and your strength in the research collaboration are going to change. So I would definitely tell that person that they are not quite as done as she thought. um, and maybe also a bit on the negative feedback that you better develop positive relationships with negative feedback because it is part of our career as academics.
That's very true. Another question that we ask guests is if there is a writing habit or practice that's been working for you.
The idea about habits is that you do it all the time. That is, you do it on a daily basis. When I came to the University of Chicago, my colleague here was John Casiopo, who was a great psychologist and passed a few years back. And I think that he was the first one to tell me that you write every day. Okay, it's part of your job. Maybe you don't write a paper. Maybe you don't have a paper to write right now. Okay, so I don't know. Write an op-ed. Okay, write ideas for the book that you might write or not. Okay, write a LinkedIn post. But write. Okay, it's now you wake up in the morning and you exercise. Well, you go to work and you write. So write something. Okay, engage this part of your brain. For me now, I feel that without writing, you cannot really think through a problem. You don't quite converse with others, and that just has to be a daily practice.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Ayelet. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing, sponsored by the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. Visit our podcast description to find out how to contact us and send us your questions about academic writing and publishing. Follow us on social media at Writing It Pod and subscribe to us so you never miss an episode.